What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. So one that I was really interested in going over just because it's a very strange sounding band, and admittedly my exposure to them is very minimal. But I wanted to check them out just because I know there's always a tremendous amount of hype around their releases. So we're going to go over the newest offering and self-titled offering from Artificial Brain. This comes out on the 3rd of June on Profound Lore Records. This is the band's third full length. They hail from Long Island, New York. And this is some twisted, weird, dissonant, get ready for that word a lot because that's very fucking accurate, technical death metal slash progressive death metal slash, I'm just going to go ahead and call it avant-garde because this is very strange, atonal, atmospheric. Like, some of this doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. Like, my pathetic human brain didn't quite understand all of this even after repeat listens, so maybe it's time to upgrade to an artificial brain. I don't know if that's like outpatient surgery or whatnot. I really haven't looked into it, but it sounds painful. So looking into this band, when I looked into all the members and such, I noticed that there are 3 guitarists on here, and yeah, they use them. It's just a wall of guitars, a wall of dissonant, atonal melodies and wild crawling riffs and technical play. And honestly, like, if you're not creating a wall of sound with 3 guitarists, you probably only need 2. These guys need 3 because there's so much wild interplay in here, and plus the other guitarists also supply keyboards occasionally, there's spacey synths, and there's even a saxophone because saxophones have become metal as fuck within the last, I don't know, 5 years or so. The opening track, Artificial Brain, on the album Artificial Brain by the band Artificial Brain, is a pretty good pace setter in terms of what you're going to get. It's a shorter track, not an intro, it's an actual song, and it pretty much gets you prepared for, again, the walls of dissonance, the strange songwriting, and just their overall vibe, which is like kind of cosmic and spacey, but also brutal and maybe kind of shoegazy in spots. It's such a weird listen just in terms of the overall sound of this band, and it can take wild turns within a fucking instant. Just an example, the song Cryogenic Dream World opens up with these crawling atonal guitar harmonies that kind of, call up a little bit of a nod towards Voivod just in terms of just, finding dissonant melodies and such. It has a slower, more lumbering pace. It's a very strange, kind of unsettling sort of, melody. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but then all of a sudden it takes a shift into this very pretty melody with the same guitars, and then a spacey synthesizer on top of that, supplying some of the prettiest melodies in the entire album. And all that is within like the first, I think, minute and a half of the song. You're like, wow, that's a hard fucking turn. Well, that's a lot of this album. Production-wise, this is a very interesting sounding album. This is Colin Marston doing the mixing and mastering on here, and somehow he's kind of made this sort of like a muffled, kind of muddy sound, but like not poorly mixed. It doesn't sound like it's a terrible mix at all. It just sounds very, I don't know, muffled. Not necessarily like compressed or anything like that, but it just sounds extra dirty. And generally with like progressive metal and technical death metal, you hear more clean production, like, because you want to hear all the different notes very clearly and everything just, crystal clear. This is kind of deliberately dirty, like it's kind of like, I don't know, lost in a fucking cave or something like that. But it's interesting where things sit in the mix, namely the vocals. Now the vocals on here, at least when they're done by the frontman, because there are 3 guest vocalists on here, and one of them is actually on, I believe, 4 different tracks, but the vocals sit kind of far back in the mix, and it kind of makes sense because they're mostly low growls, like more brutal death metal growls. And honestly, it just kind of sounds like there was like a pig or a fucking bullfrog in the studio just kind of making noises. They don't seem to project much past like all the, guitars and the bass and the synths and everything, but they are there. They do kind of add a more brutal atmosphere. And when this band gets flat out brutal, like the song Parasite Signal, which is just explosive and actually features a little bit more brutal death metal, like, Long Island native suffocation in there, they really work well. But that isn't like the overall comparison here. Like, a lot of this is kind of closer to bands like Wormed. I would definitely say Gorguts, especially since Luke LeMay is on here. Nocturnus, which makes sense because Mike Browning's on here. But also bands like Dodecahedron or like Demilich mixed with Cryptopsy. All these things kind of, thrown together, but meticulously crafted, because these songs, while they sound just batshit crazy, and they kind of are really well constructed. Especially songs like Embalmed with Magma, which sounds fucking brutal as hell. That has a really cool, like, slow build at the start. It has more ambient noise to start off, and the drums slowly come in a kind of a slow rhythm where they're just beating the shit out of the toms and the snare. And I don't know, it kind of reminded me more of Godflesh, but that really starts to build up in intensity, and the atmosphere starts becoming more dissonant and crazy, and I like that slow build. There aren't many songs that really do that. Usually it kind of launches into a blitz of just strange atonal tremolos and riffs and weird interplay, but the slow build, it kind of gives you a good sense of like the layers on this, because this album is insanely layered in insanity. But within all the insane play, there's a lot of cool melodies on here. Like, I was kind of shocked at how melodic this could be at points. Celestial Cyst, which sounds like a thing that Galactus had to have removed from like his back or something like that, has this really dark, dreary sort of start with the like crawling atonal fucking riffs, and then it slowly starts to build up some really cool proggy melodies, and having Mike Browning on that track definitely reminded me a lot of stuff that you would hear on the Key, albeit maybe a little bit more brutal. And A Lofty Grave actually throws in some cool wrinkles with some more black metal riffing on there, and this is the one that features a really wild saxophone solo, but in terms of like that melodic thing, it starts off as this twisted, jazzy, just nuts fucking solo on the saxophone, and then it shifts into this very pretty solo on the saxophone, and that transition is just very odd, but it was just cool to hear it pivot from one fucking extreme to the next, and it kind of made the song like a really interesting journey. And I absolutely loved the more melodic breakdowns that were on Tome of the Exiled Engineer. I really thought those were kind of interesting, particularly because when you hear breakdown, you think more brutality, and there are some really heavy breakdowns on here, especially the end of that song gets very doomy and very heavy, but there are some really cool melodic breakdowns on there that really generated some cool hooks, and this was kind of not the normal in here, because a lot of this is atonal and just crazier than hell and very unpredictable. But I think it's smart that they transition to like some slightly more hooky stuff while still staying dissonant and fucking crazier than hell, but it actually generates kind of unique hooks. They don't just bombard you with dissonance all the time. Well, most of the time. But I do appreciate the fact that it's not a total bombardment of just technical, nuttery and, just dissonant, atonal strangeness all the time. Most of the time. I'm definitely not saying that this is like a very accessible poppy album at all. It's not. This is a strange fucking listen, but it does have memorable hooks to it. I think that helps with the overall flow of the album, which this is kind of a head fuck. Like 2 times through this, and it's just kind of hard to wrap your head around what they're doing and what they're trying to create in terms of atmosphere. And the atmosphere in here is strange. At no point does this album feel very welcoming or inviting. It just feels like it's just there to fuck with you. Admittedly, I can get lost in the distance sometimes, and while I was super impressed with the musicality, especially the drum work is fucking fantastic. There's lots of weird jazzy fills and breakdowns all over here, and pummeling blast beats. There's even occasionally like a snare switch up, because occasionally you hear like the slam pingy snare every now and then on Celestial Cyst, and then on Parasite Signal. And the last song, The Last Words of a Wobbling Star. I'm not sure if it weebled first, but it definitely wobbled. But it just kind of pops up out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden, like you're kind of just settling in the mix, and all of a sudden the snare shifts over to a completely different sound and then just disappears. But I have to say, like, most of this I really got into. Like, I could really get lost in. My main issue with this album was probably the vocals, just because most of the time they just stay at this kind of low gurgle for most of the album. Mike Browning and Luke LeMay definitely add a bit more vocal dynamic, as well as the third vocalist, who I can't think of his name, I should have wrote it down. But they do break it up a little bit, and there are some like black metal screams here and there, but I kind of felt like, with as imaginative and strange and outside of the box as this whole sound is, the vocals kind of felt a little too one gear. And the fact that they didn't change from song to song, it kind of gave it sort of a uniform feel because you were getting like, you know, dissonance, guttural vocals, and kind of the same stuff in a lot of songs. And if you had like some different vocals on there, it might change up a little bit. It might break up the songs a bit more. But overall, I thought this was pretty damn good. And this was honestly my first exposure to this band outside of hearing a couple of tracks before from earlier albums. This was the first time that I sat down and listened to an entire album, and honestly, it's pretty fucking good. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this 3.5 stars. The technical prowess of this band is outstanding. The fact that there are 3 guitarists all creating different lines of melody, quote unquote, because it's very dissonant and atonal. It's just very wild sounding, and you are greeted with a barrage of just insane song structure and kind of otherworldly atmosphere across the board. It did take me a little while to settle into this, but once I did, I really just kind of latched on the overall sound. And there are some bits where they kind of take the atmosphere and kind of, you know, go a little too far with it, like just in terms of like, hey, let's just get to the song part. But overall, I think this is a really good album and definitely worth checking out. Like, I mean, if you're already a big fan of like later Gorgut stuff, I would definitely say that's a huge influence of theirs. And as like more avant-garde as it is, it's not to the point where it's unlistenable. There's definitely moments of melody and hooks to latch onto. This is, you know, kind of a surprise. I wasn't sure if I was really gonna like this, and I ended up liking a good chunk of it. So yeah, definitely check this one out. I mean, if you're looking for something weird, this is fucking weird, but it's also really fucking good, so check it out. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We're also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there'll be a link down below. We are starting to get more involved in Patreon. We have something going, which you guys will see a video based on that, and I think it should be a lot of fun. But also down there is a link to thrallsmetal.com if you'd like to get one of our kick-ass shirts, and there's also a link down there for the Denver Deathfest submissions. If you are interested, if you are a band or you are in a band, more appropriately, click that link down there, and there is pretty much a forum to throw your hat in the ring and see if you can get on this fest. It'll go on from September 30th through to October 2nd. We will stop taking submissions on the 15th of June, and then we'll start making some announcements as to the lineup. That will probably come later in June because we have to settle on all the submissions and such, so bear with us on that one. But if you are interested, click that link down below. And of course, thank you to everyone that has liked, subscribed, followed, commented, any of that. Thank you to everyone that fucking came up and said hi to us at MDF. That was absolutely awesome. I'm still kind of like on cloud 9 about that. That was just a fuck ton of fun. Thank you all so damn much. And with that, we will catch you later.